there's been a betting scandal within the Conservative Party that has blighted them for the last few days, and I think it's worth looking at because it really shows just how unrecoverable the Conservative Party's campaign is, to the extent where now the very campaign manager, 2 weeks out from the election, has taken a leave of absence. So they're all waving the white flag over at CCHQ, and I don't really blame them. They're all going to be out of a job. So Politico, I've got the coverage, but I'll give you the breakdown. Basically, Craig Williams, he's a candidate, and he was the parliamentary aide to Rishi Sunak while he was still serving as Prime Minister. Obviously, everything's been put on hold at the moment while the election's running. And he placed a £100 bet on the timing of the poll for the general election just days before Sunak went public and actually called the vote. So it's essentially insider trading. Risking your entire reputation and your parties for £100. You'd at least put a little bit more on it than that, wouldn't you? Like, the odds might have been a bit better. Don't know, strange price for your integrity, but I suppose that's the Conservative Party for you. And then the BBC decided to reveal, and this was Wednesday, so 2 days ago now, the Tory candidate Laundra Sanders, who recently worked in Conservative HQ, was also being looked at by the watchdog, and I believe that she's going to be suspended as a candidate as well. She's the wife of Lee, who turns out is the Conservatives' director of campaigning. So he's the actual campaign director who has now taken a leave of absence, again, 2 weeks out from the campaign. So that's two candidates, the director of campaigning, and it turns out as well that a Met police officer, who's part of Sunak's security detail, also decided to put a bet in because he'd been hearing things from within Downing Street. What's quite hilarious is that on the same day, the Conservatives put out a meme saying, if you bet on Labour, you can never win. That has since been deleted.
I didn't know about that, but that's wonderful. Everything has aligned to make this one of the worst Conservative campaigns I've ever seen by a significant margin. And this is sort of the icing on the cake, this whole betting scandal, because it does epitomise what the Conservative Party have sort of gained a reputation for, very justifiably so, that they are corrupt and they're so incompetent at it that they always get found out in the end.
Well, I would want to put a warning in here as well, though, because I think one of the problems with what happened with the John Major episodes in the 1990s is that when the Tories lost that election in 1997, it was pinned on precisely these sorts of scandals, slightly akin to this, sort of Tory sleaze, all that sort of thing, and that allowed an attitude to gain a foothold in the Conservative Party corridors of power, that the election wasn't lost for political reasons, it was lost because of these more sort of human frailty reasons. And the more that we focus on pinning the Tories' defeat on these kinds of corruption scandals, important though they are, and illustrative of the fundamental vacancy at the heart of the Conservative Party mentality. I mean, they don't really believe in anything. They are just these people who, I think as Pete Hitchens likes to put it, sort of their sole function is seeking office for the sons of gentlemen, that sort of thing. It's important as well that we emphasize the political reasons for their loss rather than the corruption-based reasons for their loss.
Yeah, it's not just purely that they're sex pests and addicts and constantly falling over themselves to make practice of themselves on Twitter. It's that they've betrayed their electorate, their mandate, particularly since 2010.
Yes.
Particularly on the issue of migration. And this is the fruits of that, because they decided to coup out two prime ministers who were at least chosen by the voting public or the membership, and then anyone associated with them which helps them win with successful campaigns was then removed. And then the unpopular, unelected prime minister, backed up by the Cameron establishment, which then lost on the issue of Brexit, are the only people allowed in to then run the campaign, which is running the Conservative Party into the ground. And then the few remaining Zoomers that are sort of excited that since that energy has drifted over to Farage's camp, as we recently discussed on NCF, when they were in CCHQ, I've got friends who have friends inside CCHQ and said, yeah, they were all on board with at least helping Rishi win. And once he announced the National Service and Triple Dot Plus policies, they've given up. They're quiet quitting. So that's why you're getting terrible memes like this, which are both optically poisonous and badly timed. So just crashing and burning. The other interesting thing is as well that the journalists that have been reporting on the betting scandal themselves also use insider information to place bets. So the entire Westminster lobby bubble are themselves incredibly corrupt.
So that's very interesting, because of course it suggests that they've got inside information directly from the Conservative Party, doesn't it? Which is unsurprising, but it's a very obvious example of it.
It's very leaky. It's the exact same thing as all the journalists that were lambasting Boris Johnson over Partygate, and again, totally deservedly, were also guilty. Was it Beth Rigby that violated lockdown as well after she was complaining about Dominic Cummings?
Was not Kay Burley? Kay Burley?
Kay Burley? I can't remember. One of those horrible lying hacks on Sky, which we've had many run-ins with. They're all distinguishable at this point.
It's wonderful. It's sort of a mimetic magic that Rishi Sunak delivered a speech outside where they built the Titanic for such a leaky campaign, isn't it?
Yes, quite. There we go. So all of this sort of stuff has coalesced in what seems like God himself trying to deliver the Conservative Party 0 seats. So let's go through some of the polls. There's a new Telegraph one that says that the Tories are set to just slump to 53 seats. So about 3 weeks ago, it was 100. Now, the Telegraph, often dubbed the Tory graph because they're very sympathetic to the party, are saying 53. That's pretty brutal. And that's 3/4 of the sitting cabinet voted out, including Rishi Sunak as a sitting prime minister losing his own seat, which I think is the first time it's ever happened. So he'll be standing next to Count Binface being told that he's going to have to go back to California post-haste. This is the polling from Savanta, and there was about 18,000 people between June the 7th and June the 18th. Now, the worst defeat the Conservative Party have ever suffered, so this is the modern Conservatives before they were the Tory party, was 131 seats in 1906. The worst of their predecessors, which is the Tories, hence the interchangeable name, was in 1754 when they won 106. So that's half of that. So that would actually pretty much annihilate the party down to its One Nation caucus members who, I mean, they'll have less seats than the Lib Dems. They'll be a completely irrelevant political force.
I was about to say, the Lib Dems have, Ed Davey, he's been on rubber rings and not really taking it very seriously.
Robert Dingy Rapids politics, yes.
Yes, and even he's putting up a better campaign than the Tories, of course. You know, they haven't been in charge, but still.
Yeah, he's going to get 50, at least. So, and that's still 2 weeks out. So a little bit of tactical voting, and the Lib Dems, as in many other polls, could get more than the Tories. Labour are meant to get 516, according to this, and that's very high. I think that might be a bit of an overestimation.
Just to intensify the scale of those defeats if they come true, whether it's 53 or 80 or 100, in either case lower than the 1906 and 1754 record lows. Both of those losses, 1754 and 1906, took place at a time when on the other side there were political titans. You know, we had, in 1906 you had the upcoming liberal generation, people like David Lloyd George and Asquith, and likewise in 1754 they were up against William Pitt the Elder, the Earl of Chatham, who was one of the most celebrated heroes in the nation. These people are up against Keir Starmer.
Yeah, exactly. It shows
the juxtaposition.
The embarrassing depths to which they have sunk, very, very Titanic-like. The only political force they are facing down, which is slowly siphoning votes away, is, of course, Nigel Farage. But even, look, Nigel's a fantastic figure, but he's as yet to be a Pitt the Elder. Let's put it that way. The Reform, apparently, according to this, are going to get 0. So that's why I'm actually very questionable about this poll, because I don't think Reform are going to get 0.
So even the Farage seat in
Exactly.
Clapton.
I think there's something dodgy with the methodology going on here, frankly. But it is interesting to see the Tories just keep getting chunked down. And the SNP are going to go down to 8 from 48. And I think that's a lot of the bulk of what they're predicting Labour to make gains on, is specifically up in Scotland. Because the SNP, much like the Tories, have traded out 3 different leaders in the last 18 months. And John Swinney is not particularly good. I mean, see the dreadful question time thing last night. So what the Telegraph are reporting, and I think this is why they're hoping Reform are going to get 0, is the Telegraph are saying Kemi Badenoch's going to be the only one left. And so I think that might be the reason that this reporting has been done the way it has, because there are certain factions within the Conservative Party, particularly the One Nation caucus, who would love Kemi Badenoch to remain as leader. And Kemi's seat is on a coin flip as to whether or not it's going to be taken by, I think her seat's under threat from the Lib Dems. And apparently the cabinet members that are going to be taken out, I mean, there's a diagram in here that just shows that's just brutal. That's almost all of them. And the only 2 remaining leadership candidates would be Tom Tugendhat, who's the sort of Five Eyes, Bilderberg group favourite candidate, and Kemi, who would be the establishment pick with R-based black woman TM, except she's obsessed with ESG and all that sort of stuff.
Also particularly insidious in light of the fact that there is, in the way that there isn't with Tom Tugendhat, there is a kind of naive enthusiasm, particularly among boomers, people who read the Telegraph and people who read Conservative Home, that sort of thing, like good people, but not completely clued in. No one really views Tugendhat as a potential right-wing warrior in the making, whereas there is this perception of Kemi as a right-wing warrior in the making. And firstly, I just think it's very unhealthy, this tendency that we have in order to fight an increasingly racialized politics in this country, to hide behind minorities in doing so, as if we don't have a right to object to CRT, regardless of whether we have a black woman in tow and an Indian in tow and all that sort of thing. But also, another particularly insidious thing I don't like about Kemi Badenoch is that often when she's on the back foot and being pushed by sort of white, woke, liberal Sky presenters or BBC presenters about Britain being systemically racist. She has the decency to deny that we're systemically racist, which I suppose is something, but she'll often say, if we were systemically racist, I wouldn't be in my position, as though the proof of us not being systemically racist is that a woman born in Nigeria can rise to such heights in Britain. Now, obviously, on one level, that is proof, but I don't think we need to supply that kind of proof in order to demonstrate our anti-racist credentials. And so there's always a tendency on the part of Kemi to defeat our enemies, so to speak, our opponents, so to speak, but always on terms highly favorable to their own ideological hobby horses. And that's a very dangerous long-term strategy.
Yeah, we don't need to filter our legitimacy through her success, quite. But the people that are going to get wiped out include Rishi, Jeremy Hunt, James Not So Cleverly, Penny Mordaunt, Suella Braverman in this. Now, that's also another one where I'm a bit like, I don't know if this poll's exactly correct, because Suella's got a pretty comfortable lead. It's down in the south, and there's a lot of energy being put in to keep Suella in place, because that's people that are sort of closer to our way of thinking's preferred continuity candidate, because they at least think that she'll ally with / fold herself into Farage. So I think Suella remains. I would be surprised if she did get wiped out.
The footage of her dancing with Farage at the Tory party conference would probably help that, wouldn't it?
Well, she's at NatCon with him in a couple of weeks when Carl and I are going. She's at every NatCon with Farage. They're quite friend. I mean, she did just say in the Times last week saying we need to embrace Farage. Whether or not the car's light blue or dark blue, she doesn't really care at this point. The other people that are going to get wiped out, though, is quite interesting, is Priti Patel, Liz Truss, again, why I don't really trust this poll, because she's got quite a commanding lead, and Rees-Mogg. Rees-Mogg is pretty much going to get annihilated by redistricting. So, interesting times. I mean, they only have themselves to blame. You can check if your MP, particularly, is going to be wiped out by this with the link down in the description, because Telegraph is a handy tool. There are some other polls as well that are suggesting the same sort of thing. Now, YouGov has one. This is one that you sent me the link to. So Labour, it says, is going to be on 425 seats. So that's up 233 from 2019. Conservatives down to 108. So that's down 257 from 2019. Lib Dems at 67. So they would be the official... well, no, hang on a minute. They wouldn't be the official opposition, but they're much higher than they were in the Telegraph one, rather. So they're up by 56. SNP at 20. Reform on 5. And what I find quite interesting is they've mapped the ones that Reform are going to win out as Clacton, so that's obviously Nigel, Ashfield, so that's Lee Anderson, Basildon and Bickerelli. Now, the reason they're going to win that one in Essex isn't just because of all the East End exiles, but that's because Richard Holden, the disastrous Tory party chairman, tried to parachute himself into that seat as a safe seat, kicking the original candidate out, and it seems like there might be an on-the-ground rebellion saying, well, you think you can just take us for granted. No, thank you. And then the other ones are Great Yarmouth and Luton Horncastle. And I would probably add Tice to that one, because it seems that Boston and Skegness are pretty reliable. So it looks like Reform, let's say about seven seats at this point. There was another one as well yesterday. So this is Redfield and Wilton Strategies, and it's putting Reform at 19 and Conservatives at 18. So they're maintaining that sort of 1 point within the margin of error, but lead over the Conservative Party in terms of the popular votes. You're seeing a repeated pattern in that the Conservatives have burned all their credibility, they've torpedoed their base, and that Reform are rising up as the opposition with popular consent among the right, which is encouraging. Now, the most encouraging poll, which must be taken with a pinch of salt, and I think we all want to believe it, and it's by a friend of the show, Matt Goodwin, and his People's Polling Company. He rather boldly suggests that Reform are on 24 to the Conservatives' 15. Now, bear in mind, this is a poll of, I think, about 1,000 odd people. So the sample size is pretty small. So
1,200, there it is, yeah.
There we go. So it's not spread as much across constituencies as something like electoral calculus, or that is. I do want to believe it.
I think from my knowledge of sample sizes, 1,200 or so is still enough to draw inference from. Right, it's not too small. Yes. I think when you get into the realm of too small, it's like under 200 perhaps. But obviously, when it comes to polling, bigger is better for sample size, and particularly with who he's sampling as well, who he's directed towards this poll, it should be taken with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I think the sample size is only notable because this is such an outlier in favour of Reform. So it might be overbiasing or oversampling rather Reform voters. But it's not that this couldn't be the case in a week or so, because so much has changed. And many of the other polls, there was one that came out the other day that had taken polling from before the start of June. So it was taking its results from before Farage even got into the race. So that's a completely useless projection at that point.
An interesting quirk about the first past the post system as well is that not only do polls under such a system reflect or seek to reflect public opinion. They also create it in important ways as well. They shape it in important ways, because as soon as reform is perceived in the public mind as a credible party of government, and that's likelier to happen the more we see polls like this in which they're, say, 10 points ahead of the Conservatives, or even just ahead of the Conservatives at all, then the Conservative strategy of saying a vote for reform is a vote for Labour, it can be completely inverted, and you can get a preference cascade in all sorts of constituencies, which, you know, in a PR system wouldn't amount to much at all, but under a first past the post system, those sorts of perceptions about likelihood of victory at a national scale will all of a sudden affect the arithmetic on the ground and the kind of the psychology of voters on the ground in particular constituencies. And so there is that consideration as well.
It is also worth bearing in mind as well that Reform may well poll above the Liberal Democrats, but the Liberal Democrats have also got large concentrations of historic voters. I know that in North Devon, for example, an area I'm very familiar with, they have a bit of a stronghold there, and that concentration will actually allow them to get more parliamentary seats than their percentage might lead you to believe.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's all the NIMBYs that want to swim in the Thames, or in places like Bath that want to conserve the historic character of the place and are really happy with refugees and people sleeping rough. Just not there. Just not particularly there.
Don't be silly.
But the interesting thing, to back up your point about how proportional representation interplays with the popular vote, just to illustrate for our American viewers, right? So before, when Reform were on about 18% in that Telegraph poll, they said 0 seats, right? When they're on about 19, 20% in the YouGov poll, they're saying 5. Matt Goodwin here is saying if Reform polled 20%, he's saying that the Tories would get 45 seats and Reform would get 50. So we do have a very strange system.
Yes.
And I think this is the sort of incentive for, at least beforehand, Farage to mould himself into the Tory party, because you have that ground game. Now I think whatever existing apparatus the Tories have, if you get a result like this, and it's not impossible to get on election night, and we will be calling it in live, so you'll be able to see, to cannibalise that and make them bend towards reform seems to be the modus operandi of Nigel Farage at the moment. And that's fun. I like that.
To sort of summarise it in a sort of nutshell, if you will, the more they start getting into the 20%, polling nationally, the more they're going to get exponential gains in seats.
Yeah, spot on. Thank you very much. So the Tories have obviously entered panic mode, seeing all of this crossing their desk every day. And now they're withdrawing support from other seats and going back to what they previously thought were super safe seats. I mean, Rishi Sunak has been campaigning in towns in like Devonshire that have 20,000 majority at 2019, because he's trying to cling on to it as much as possible. This is a Bloomberg piece with some inside information. So he went to 2 districts in Devon, both with majorities over 14,000. And this is because, apparently, this is a quote, Conservative campaign headquarters on Wednesday told Tory candidates in several constituencies who were defending majorities of over 10,000 votes that their funds and favourable access to party activists was being withdrawn. So if you have a 10,000 majority, you're not getting any assistance from CCHQ whatsoever. That's ridiculous. According to people who spoke on the condition of anonymity, of course, Sunak will get additional resources in his own constituency of Richmond and Northallerton. And they said this was after the Savanta poll that came out in the Telegraph saying he would be the first Prime Minister to lose his seat. So he's trying to save face and his own career at this point. But personally, I think he doesn't really care. He wants to go back to California anyway. Other activists in different parts of Britain have been told to head to the constituencies of cabinet ministers seen as under threats. They've been told to abandon their own home seats and their own home MPs to go and save the careers of cabinet ministers who have steered the Tory party into oblivion. Now, the Telegraph put out a piece shortly after that, and they've said that Tories trying to win seats which have Conservative majorities of up to 7,000. So they're just clocking off the amount that they're going. So 7 and also 10. Those are significant margins of error in margins of victory in any other election. And now they're saying even in seats we've got 20k, rush down and put all your resources just so we can hold on to at least 50, which is pretty terrifying. This came directly from an email from Tory head of field operations, and it was sent last weekend with the subject, campaign support not in the north. Well, that's pretty blatant, isn't it? They just think that's a total lost cause.
To put it into perspective, Southwest Devon, which is the constituency I actually grew up in, would usually, the Conservatives would win by a majority of about 30,000 votes. They would have over half of all votes would be in their favour. Now they're potentially struggling to even keep the seat itself.
I think the same is going to happen in Old Bexley and Sidcup as well. It's been a consistently Conservative seat, I think, since it's created. It didn't even lose in 1997, as far as I'm aware. And it was held by James Brokenshire until he died of cancer, who was a Remainer, even though I think the the seat itself voted Brexit. And when he passed away, Louis French, he's a sort of just perfectly nice but boring chap, came in and his vote share collapsed, not because people were necessarily breaking for reform in high numbers, even though Tice himself was standing at the time. It's just because all the Tories stayed at home and they weren't bothered. And I wouldn't be surprised this time if we get it on a knife's edge between Tory and Labour, just because of the amount of people that go for reform. You're in Brighton, so it doesn't really matter to you, does it?
It's totally irrelevant, yeah. My only influence is on NCF and Lotus seaters, which probably more marked than the kind that you get just with just having one vote in a constituency. So that's my saving grace.
Well, we've got lots of reform candidates watching, so I do wish all of you the best of luck. And if you do happen to win, you're more than welcome to dial in on the election night live stream to have a little bit of a glow. But so the email read, as much as I would like to see you helping a target seat in the north, taking a pragmatic approach, I am sure there is much one closer to home or work. If you feel the need to pop up and shoot a couple of videos, great. But there is no pressure from me. Time is valuable and hours in a car isn't gaining votes. Thanks. So that's all the people that won in 2019 in the Red Wall, like Miriam Cates and Nick Fletcher, just chucked under the bus, and actually much better MPs than all of the cabinet put together. So it's pretty disappointing, but maybe should have defected beforehand, lads, it turns out. So obviously the blame game started. The knives are already out, but now it's the monkey fight on the deck in The Simpsons. Gove's the first one to pin blame on anyone except himself. Michael Gove at a closed-door event. It was a building site in West London, actually. He said, one of the challenges in particular that we face is the reputation for sound economic management, which is essential to Conservative success. It took a bit of a knock in the period between Boris and Rishi. Oh, it just so happens that was the period when your protege decided that you had ruined everything, kicked you out of the cabinet, decided to do something slightly different, and then you helped coup her out, wasn't it, Michael? Do you think that 14 years of unpopular governance might be blamed on you and your cronies rather than a woman that was in for about 40 days who couldn't have really done much? No? Okay, well, this is why you're absolutely going to lose, and your arrogance deserves it. But it's also stuff like this, and this is a couple of stories that it caught my eye. So last night, did either of you gents watch the election special on Question Time?
Certainly not.
Nope.
Okay, brilliant. So everyone else who had more fun things to do, like watch paint dry, wrap their testicles in barbed wire.
I was asleep, yeah.
I don't blame you. Yeah, so half the audience. Well, this was a clip that was circulating from it. So Rishi Sunak was asked, and I won't play the clip, I'll just summarise, was asked about his national service policy. What happens if all those youngsters don't want to die for Ukraine and Israel, actually, because you've taken away their ability to own a home and then made their country look unrecognisable? And he said, well, we're exploring our options, so what we might do is something what they similar to they do in Europe. I think when he said Europe, he misspoke and meant the Chinese, because he said, if you don't sign up for national service, we might take away your bank account and your driving licence.
That seems like a nice positive incentive, doesn't it? Oh, wait.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, your bank account, which is absolutely essential to function in an economy, especially one that he wants to transition towards cashlessness, because he was spearheading the CBDC when he was head of the Treasury as the Chancellor. So just arbitrarily punishing teenagers for not wanting to go to war.
Owen McIntyre, who you interviewed recently on Tomlinson Talks, and who I understand is a good friend of the show and has just written a wonderful book called The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Go Tyrannical or Become Tyrannical, or something like that, made an excellent point in response to precisely this. What once a kind of homogenizing liberal, homogenizing, rampaging liberalism erases and corrodes natural bonds of loyalty. You need to create highly artificial technocratic bonds of loyalty in order to hold, the wretched tatters together that you are yourself responsible for. And it's perfectly on display here, where rather than just letting the kind of natural instinctive sense of friendship as the basis for the polis, just being the organic glue that makes things like national service plausible and intelligible to people and indeed desirable to people, once you've erased all of that, all you can do is threaten a kind of punitive pseudo-social credit system in order to keep it, and that's just not going to work long term.
Yeah, you've got to play teacher and make the squabbling kids play nice.
Indeed, yeah.
Quick thing to the production booth, your microphone is on and we can hear you, by the way. You might want to turn that off, guys. Anyway, moving on to the next bit. There's another story here that was quite interesting, and this hasn't got airtime on GB News yet, but I have spoken to Charlie Peters about it. He found out that there's a bunch of Tory candidates who have signed a Hindu manifesto, because that's the absolute priority, isn't it? So what this is promising to bring over more elderly Hindus and religious workers to the UK. So more net dependents from India and more Hindus. I wonder why under a Rishi Sunak this has been a popular policy, but there you go. So the four candidates in question are Bob Blackman, Teresa Villas, Laura Farris. It shouldn't surprise anyone because in 2020 she went to a gathering to kneel for BLM. Apparently she used to work for the Clinton campaign as well. So absolutely delightful woman who shouldn't be in the Conservative Party. And Amit Jogia, they all supported the manifesto, which was launched earlier this month. It also calls for those who commit microaggressions against Hindus to face specific prosecution as anti-Hindu hate or Hinduphobia. So implementing a caste system in the UK, absolutely fantastic.
But I mean, if you have a Labour Party which to increasingly relies on a kind of clientele class of Muslim voters, and if you've pissed off the native population such that they're now all migrating to reform, you need to find other clients. And the Hindus, don't at scale think terribly highly of those Muslims. And clearly this is just an entrenchment of sectarian politics, the kind of sectarian politics that becomes inevitable once you embrace diversity in a population en masse. And we see it all over the world. And it's readily acknowledged in other parts of the world, but we somehow believe that because of our, incredibly instinctively attractive liberal values, we'll be spared it here if we have a porous border, but of course it's not the case.
Yeah, it's not magic soil that suddenly strips everyone of their cultural, civilizational, and historical priors. Hence why you get riots in Leicester over a cricket game, which is absolutely fantastic. I do also want to point out that in 2014, Rishi Sunak, when he was working for Policy Exchange, developed a paper, something like The Changing Face of Britain. Yeah. And he happened to note, and he gave an interview to Al Jazeera at the time, that Indians voted more for the Conservative Party. And he said politicians might want to take note of these demographic realities when shaping migration policy. So basically, import loads more Indians and hopefully you import more Conservative voters than you're importing Muslims who will vote for Labour. And I find it very interesting that now Commonwealth students and members of the Commonwealth, 250,000 Indians who arrived here in the last year, will be able to vote in this election, even though they're not British citizens. How fascinating is that? Wonder if there's some kind of plan there. Anyway, so all of these problems are of the Tories' own making, and yet still you get Steve Baker. Now, I won't play this clip because we're running up against time. But Steve himself says that he does not want Nigel Farage in the party, in the Conservative Party, or anything to do with the Reform Party, because Nigel Farage has toxified the debate by talking about broad members of the community with his remarks about Islam. And he also admitted that in 2019, he helped broker the deal that convinced Nigel to stand down in Conservative seats with the Brexit Party to allow Boris to sweep to victory. So Steve Baker is an architect of the containment the Conservative Party have tried to conduct on Brexit, on migration, on multiculturalism, on Islam, much to his own detriment, because I actually used to know a man that worked in Steve Baker's constituency office, and I can tell you, he used to have a map on the wall of his constituency. He used to point to different areas and say, well, that's a lost wall because there's too many Muslims there. Yes. So Steve Baker has been the engineer of his own defeat. He's going to lose, according to electoral calculus, by 22%, or by the Telegraph polling we mentioned, by about 19%. And it's mainly in those Muslim wards which are highly diverse non-whites, because they're not a big fan of him. As you would know, if you follow Steve Baker's Twitter feed, a little while ago, he got accosted by a man who's a pro-Palestine activist, and he decided to press his personal safety alarm. Of course, not a benefit afforded to the girls in Rochdale and Rotherham. Thank you very much, Steve, and I think you deserve absolute electoral oblivion for your betrayal. Also, a bit inconvenient for Baker on the whole anti-Muslim narrative, and I hate to do this because, as we just said about Kemi, we don't want to shield it, right. But there is a bloke who's just donated hundreds of thousands of pounds to Reform, and he is a practicing Muslim. So clearly, for a very slim minority of some that don't want to engage in sectarian politics, it's not exactly an issue. This is Zaya Yusuf, who founded Velocity Black, which is a concierge app. He's a multi-millionaire, and he told the Telegraph his parents came here legally. When he talks to his friends, they're affronted as anyone by illegal channel crossings, which are an affront to all hard-working British people, but not least the migrants who played the rules and came legally. Having spent time with Farage, it's clear that he wants the best for Britain and its people, no matter their religion or skin colour. Now, I think I'm more than happy that he's pledging his money to Reform, as long as he doesn't try and soften their opinions on legal migration, because note, he only talked about illegal there. But it seems that Reform are attracting far more interest from general people in various constituencies, disaffected Tory voters, non-voters, even donors at this point, who are either hemorrhaging for the Labour Party or now Reform, than the Conservative Party is. So they've dug their own grave. I think we should help them fill it.
Hi folks, thanks for watching. You can watch the entire podcast, The Lotus Eaters, live at 1 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com. And while you're there, you could sign up for £5 a month if you want to support us, help us keep the lights on, because of course we're demonetized on YouTube. And you can watch Dan Tubbs' amazing Brokenomics series, where he breaks down everything economic and various other things beside. It's excellent stuff, and we appreciate all the support. Thanks very much.